In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
Cuin Alexander our king was dead, that Scotland led in Luch and Lee. Anyway was sons of ale and bread, off wane and wax of gammon and glee. Our gold was changed to lead, Christ born in virginity. Secor, Scotland and Rammeed, that is stayed in perplexity.
The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Welcome to the Abracast, everybody. Welcome everybody to the Abracast. I'm John. So we're starting to get things normalized around here and get back on track. And we're creeping up on the 3-year anniversary of the show, at least the show in its present incarnation. I track the launch of the Abracast to June 28th of 2017. So we were hosting the show on some other podcast platform, and on moving day, which was April of 2018, I got my deal with Spreaker, which is where the show is hosted these days. And for moving day May to May of this year, we've increased our downloads by over, hold on to your fucking seats. We've increased our downloads by over 323%. So that's massive. And it keeps growing. I think we had one trending month where it was slightly less than it was the month before. But, it's an outlier. I'm not counting it. I refuse to count it. So I wanted to take a second and thank you guys so much. I don't dwell on the numbers or the rates, and certainly not the rates and reviews these days. But it makes my day when you guys reach out to me to chit chat or to offer words of encouragement or to float me a weird theory or something. So on the week of the anniversary here, I just wanted to thank you guys. Thank all of you guys very much. It's quite humbling to be able to just occupy, at least to help you occupy like at least an hour of your week. I love it, and I love when you guys reach out and talk to me. So I truly just wanted to say, creeping up on the birthday, the anniversary year, that I love it, and I love you guys. And it means everything to me. So not to make this a big, loving, let's not start sucking each other's dicks just yet. But I want to talk about the work group for a minute. You'll hear in the info dump, during the break or at the end, talking about this work group. And I swear, this is why I chose a short cold open. I swear, we're going to start kicking asses here in just a second. Just one more minute. So the fellow craft, or the folks who are supporting on Subscribestar, and the mailing list folks have this link to our slack.com work group currently over there. I haven't really talked about it much. There's a few listeners over there. Not a whole lot of action just yet. But currently, you guys might know that I'm designing a set of tarot cards. So over there, what I'm doing is a card a day. I throw it up there, talk a little bit about the card, and offer it up to discussion. So it's just sort of a way to connect us to each other outside of the Facebook and the Twitter algorithm. If you people are interested, or if not you people, that sounded accusatory. If people are interested, all you got to do is jump over to Subscribestar and join with the Fellowcraft. It's the one and only tier we have over there. It's only $3. And you get a bunch of exclusive episodes and bonus audio and all the stuff that you get from the mailing list. All the stuff the mailing list folks get too. I got to do something about that term. I got to make up a term for the mailing list folks. But anyhow, if you want to access the work group and you don't want to join the Fellowcraft, all you have to do is sign into the mailing list and get. When you do that, you get access to graphic elements, text versions of selected episodes, worksheets, additional tarot card stuff, and whatever else I throw in there. Right, so thank you. That was kind of a state of the podcast address. Okay, it looks like it's clocking in like just over 6 minutes. So I hope it wasn't too bad. But we got a great episode. So if you're playing along at home, now is the time to summon your vessel of the art, which you can pick up at Abercast.com, by the way. It's time for you to grab your vessel of the art, and it's time for you to mix up your weapon of mass distraction. Mine happens to be the Gin Jihad. I'm drinking the Gin Jihad. Big surprise tonight. So if you're with me, you got your vessel, you got your drink, you got your everything, you're ready to go. We're going to be talking about the Battle of Bannockburn, which the anniversary is this week. That's why I chose. I think the anniversary might even be on Monday or Sunday. I'm not exactly sure. So the featured website is a lot of this information is coming off of BritishBattles.com. Extensive. If you're interested in this and I don't hit anything that you want to know, just check this website out. It's extensive. So we're going to start with Alexander III of Scotland. Alexander III of Scotland. The poem that I read for the cold open was about the death of Alexander III. He died on March 19th, 1286. He was thrown from his horse, and he left no surviving heir. His queen was pregnant, but she miscarried. His 7-year-old granddaughter named Margaret, the Maid of Norway, became heir. And so she was like, wait, I'm the Queen of Scotland? Great. Now I got to go to Scotland. She died on her way to Scotland. She was on her way to get crowned in 1290. So this dude, John Balliol, was crowned king, and he turned out to be kind of like a pawn to Edward the First. Edward the First was the King of England. One of his nicknames was the Hammer of the Scots, to sort of give you an idea where all this is heading. Edward was like a real king, though. He went to a crusade. He subdued the Welsh. He was fighting with France. He was a serious motherfucker. And he had bullied this Balliol guy, this Scottish king, into recognizing Edward's position of Lord Paramount over Scotland. So basically, this Balliol guy was like, well, I'm king of Scotland. But Edward is like the king of Scotland. So this group, called the Panel of 12, I think they were also called the Guardians of Scotland, came together and they took over. And Balliol abdicated in 1296. And sort of chaos ensued. England invaded Scotland and started taking land. They took a castle at Dunbar in April. So this guy that, no one's ever heard of this dude before. He's a real obscure historical figure. What was his name again? Hold on. I got to search through my papers here to find out. Oh yeah, William Wallace took the role of the Guardian of Scotland in 1297. So this role was like a stand-in for the king. He's like a military leader in the war of Scottish independence. And after the Battle of Falkirk, however, when Wallace was defeated, two guys were appointed Guardians of Scotland. These two guys were Robert the Bruce and John the Third of Comyn, or John the Third Comyn. Comyn. And when Robert the Bruce's father died, Robert inherited his father's claim to the Scottish throne. And well, here we discover that Robert really, really wanted the crown. Robert was actually born in England. And he had a bunch of lands and stuff in England. His wife was actually part of a deal with the English monarchy. So he got his wife. His wife and his daughter, at least one of his daughters, actually got taken hostage when Robert, he kind of defected. He kind of played both ends. It's just kind of like in Braveheart. Like, he kind of played both ends for a while. But after his dad dies, he changes sides for the last time. He's like, yo, I'm going to be the guardian of this motherfucker. Me and this John Comyn dude. And we're going to fucking run this shit. Well, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. In 1305, William Wallace was put to death. Famously, his head was cut off and fucking hung on the London Bridge. And so there were 12 legit claims to the throne. The one Robert really was worried about was the one from his fellow Guardian of Scotland, this guy, John Comyn. So, hold on. So, God, I gotta stir that up or something. My God. So they didn't get along. That's probably why they appointed both of them. Anyhow, Robert. It's theorized that Robert realized that he had to do something. He was risking a civil war in the midst of this war for independence. So he gets a hold of John Comyn, and they're going to meet. And so in 1306, he has a meeting with Comyn at Greyfriars Church. And the discussion, I suppose, became heated. Because in the middle of the meeting, Robert left to the church, and he told his henchman, or his knight, or his lieutenant, whatever, this guy, Roger D. Kirkpatrick. So imagine there's like a scuffle or something in the church. Robert the Bruce comes out. Roger D. Kirkpatrick's like, yo, bro, what's up? And Robert the Bruce says, I must be off, for I doubt I have slain the Red Comyn, unquote. And Roger, without missing a beat, says back to him, he goes, I mak sicker, which means I'll make sure. And he runs into the church to finish John Comyn off. This dude has a fun story too. This Robert D. Kirkpatrick. He's got this great story because after Robert becomes king, he makes this dude like a little lord. He makes this guy like a lord. And so after they kill this guy, these three knights chase him. These three knights chase Robert and Roger. They wind up escaping, but so Robert makes this guy a lord, and his family motto becomes "I make sicker" or "I make sure." And the the heraldry that he had made for Kirkpatrick, it was like a shield, and I think it was like a little church, and there's 3 pillows on his shield, and the 3 pillows stand for the 3 knights. So this guy is a piece of this guy's a piece of work, man. Both of them. Kirkpatrick is a piece of work. This "I'll make sure" business, but Robert the Bruce, we're gonna find is he's a badass. He would be a Twitter legend. This 3 pillow thing is hilarious. So the major fallout from him killing Common is that he gets excommunicated for desecrating Greyfriars. July of 1307, Edward the First, the Hammer of the Scots, Edward Longshanks, dies, leaving his son Edward II as king. So just as much as Edward the First was like a king's king, like he was a bad motherfucker, his son was not so much of a good king. In 1307, just the ancillary, just to kind of like tie this story in with some of the other stories that we've done here. In 1307, the Knights Templar were disbanded. Actually, they weren't disbanded in 1307. Why did I write that? In 1307, the Knights Templar were arrested, and many Templars escaped the clutches of the church. Many didn't, and many wound up dying horrific deaths and being tortured beforehand. However, it wasn't officially disbanded until 1312, I think. So now let's get into it. This is where we're going to kick it off. So after Edward dies, after Edward the First dies, Robert the Bruce and his Scots followers rejoiced openly at the death of King Edward. The Bruce now embarked on his war to push England out of Scotland and to establish his dominance over his Scottish rivals as king of the Scots. So a lot of these guys with claim, the 12 other claims, he was able to pay a lot of them off to shut the fuck up. He goes, "Hey man, shut the fuck up." And he was paying some of them off to shut the fuck up. And I think that probably this Common character was kind of above that, which is why he had to get dealt with. The English castles, while a powerful mechanism for dominating occupied country with garrisons of small groups of armed knights. I'm on the website right now, by the way. It's called BritishBattles.com. During their campaign against the occupying English, the Scots became masters of the art of taking fortifications by trick and surprise. This is a great story. The standard piece of kit for the Scots, which they preferred, was a scaling ladder. There were rarely enough men in a castle to watch the length of the fortifications fully, and inevitably there were periods when such there were periods when such watch was there. There were periods when such watch as there was lapsed. I don't know who wrote that. A British person, I imagine. Approaching with stealth, the Scots would scale the wall and take the castle or town. The classic was the capture at Edinburgh Castle on 14 March 1313 by Randolph, Earl of Moray. This is another guy that was in Braveheart, Earl of Moray. The castle watch actually looked over the wall at the point where the Scots were preparing to attack before loudly moving on, leaving the Scots to scale the wall and open the gates to the waiting force, which then stormed the castle. A particular popular tale is the taking of Lithgow Castle by William Bannock In September of 1313, Bannock drove up in a cart filled with fodder for the garrison's horses and stopped the cart at the gateway, thereby preventing the garrison from closing the gate. Armed men leaped from beneath the fodder, and assisted by a band of men that rushed the gate, the castle was stormed. As each castle or town was captured, the fortifications built over many years by the English were destroyed. The English were destroyed so that the English could not reestablish their control over the country. And even if the place was retaken, this is classic move. You get it. You destroy tacticals. Finally, a few castles remained, and one of these was Stirling Castle, held for Edward II by Sir Philip de Mowbray. In around February 1313, the brother of King Robert the Bruce, his name was Edward the Bruce, began the siege of Stirling Castle. In June 1313, de Mowbray put an offer to Edward the Bruce. The offer was that if Stirling Castle was not relieved by Midsummer's Day in 1314, which was the 24th of June, de Mowbray would surrender the castle to the Bruce. To comply with this requirement, the relieving English army would need to be within 3 miles of the castle within 8 days of that date. The Bruce appears to have accepted this offer without thinking through the implications, or possibly without caring. His brother was the king, or his brother, the king, was, on the other hand, fully aware of the consequences of this rash agreement, which in effect compelled Edward II to launch a new invasion of Scotland. So they're saying it's a negative thing, but I'm like, I think it's awesome. It's like a chess game. He forced Edward II to act rashly. I think Sun Tzu would have loved this. The shaky hold Edward II maintained over his nobility is illustrated in the number of powerful noblemen who refused to answer his call to arms. And then he goes on to list a bunch of fucking guys. Just know a bunch of fucking guys didn't show up. However, a bunch of guys did answer the Bruce's call. Edward's army assembled at Berwick in May 1314. There was complete confidence in the victory over the Scots. The army began its advance into Scotland Now, by saying that that a bunch of guys didn't show up for Edward and a bunch of guys did show up for the Bruce, that does not mean the numbers were equal. We're going to get into the tale of the tape in a little bit. Just keep that in mind. I don't want to as you're going through the theater of the mind as I'm telling the story, I just don't want you to think that, we'll get to the numbers, and so you can, understand the numbers. Edward's army, he assembled at Berwick. There was complete confidence in victory over the Scots. The army began its advance into Scotland on the 17th of June 1314, a column covering considerable area, accompanied by numerous flocks of sheep and cattle to provide rations, and carts carrying the baggage of the members of the army and their quantities of fodder required for the knight's heavy fighting horses. The army marched to Edinburgh and took the old Roman road to Stirling. And beyond Falkirk, the road passed through the forest of Torwood, also known in French as Les Torres. That's my French last name, Torres. It's actually, if I were Hispanic, that would be my last name too. I would be Juan Torres. Before crossing the Bannockburn stream into New Park and onto Stirling, to the right of the route wound the tidal waters of the River Forth. Along the river was the scrubland area known as Les Palais. The area to the north of the Bannockburn ford on the route was known as the Dryfield oh boy, Balquidrock, a small tributary of the Bannockburn called the Palestream Burn, curled around to the west. Beyond the Palestream, a boggy area led down to the Forth. So if you go to like a Wikipedia page or this page, they have a map explaining all of this stuff because it all kind of, if you're trying to track the way the battle unfolds, it all makes sense, as terrain features always do when you're talking about a battle. And that's why we're here, son. We're here, son, to talk about battles. So Robert the Bruce assembled his army of Scottish foot soldiers to the south of Stirling and formed them into 4 battalions commanded by himself, Thomas Randolph, Earl of Moray, James Douglas, and his brother, Edward the Bruce. These battalions were given the name of Shiltrons. The king's Shiltron comprised of men from his own estate in Carrick and the Western Highlands. The other Shiltrons, men from the estates of their commanderies and their associates. Randolph led men from Ross and North. Edward the Bruce led men from Buchan, Mars, August, and from Galloway. The Bruces, like main head, like their ancestral lands were this Galloway. Douglas's men were from the borders. The small force of mounted knights and men-at-arms were commanded by Sir Robert Keith, who was the marshal to the King of Scotland. All right, so we're going to do the tale of the tape, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk about this epic battle. So the commanders at the Battle of Bannockburn were Robert the Bruce, the King of the Scots, head-to-head against Edward II, the King of England. When I say it like that, I just think it's like like a boxing, like a tale of the tape. Like, I see the HBO graphic, and I see like a little slash and like Robert the Bruce on one side and King Edward II on the other. The size of the armies in the Battle of Bannockburn. There was a great controversy over every aspect of the Battle of Bannockburn due to the lack of contemporary accounts. They actually don't even know where the actual fuck this thing took place. The eminent Scottish historian William Mackenzie came to the conclusion that the English army comprised around 3,000 mounted men, knights and men-at-arms, and around 13,000 foot soldiers, including a detachment of Welsh archers. This archer business gets sticky, but I think we're going to talk about it. William Mackenzie puts the Scots at around 7,000 men. Robert the Bruce's army comprised of foot soldiers with a force of around 600 light horsemen, commanded by Sir Robert Keith, the Marshal. So let's just take a second to appreciate this. In Edward's camp, Edward's side, 3,000 mounted men, knights and men-at-arms, and 13,000 foot soldiers, including archers. In Robert the Bruce's camp, 7,000 men, all foot soldiers, in a force of around 600 light horsemen. So there is a lot of hullabaloo and yakety yak about the difference between heavy cavalry and light cavalry. I'm not going to get bogged down into it because the numbers are just crazy. 3,000 mounted men, knights and men-at-arms, 600 versus 600 light horsemen. 13,000 foot soldiers versus 7,000 men. And Robert the Bruce has a very big trick up his sleeve that I guess is mixed into this 600 light horseman business. I mean, it's a brilliant and combat multiplying game changer, at least in theory. Okay, so we're going to take a break. I'm going to take a break. But hang tight. I'll be right back, everybody. Oh, this is the new one. Oh, I didn't even realize I loaded this one. I was expecting the sweet heavy metal licks.
Learn more at theabracast.com. Get graphic elements, notes, worksheets, and text versions of selected episodes, as well as access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing into the mailing list. Get all that, plus exclusive episodes, by supporting the show and becoming a subscriber at subscribestar.com.
Yeah, what do you guys think of that? Do you miss the sweet guitar licks? I don't know. I don't know if I'm sold on this one yet. I guess we'll see what happens. All right, let's get into this. So, Robert the Bruce positioned his army in the New Park with Randolph's Skiltron God, that word is so weird, to the fore, and his own immediately behind it. The chosen method of combat was for each Skiltron to form a bristling mass of spears. So think of like like 300. Haroo, haroo, and they would form like a little turtle with all the spears sticking out. I don't think these guys had spears. I think they just had, or they didn't have shields. They just had spears. A bristling mass of spears, which the English knights would be unable to penetrate. The Scots dug concealed pits, they call them pots, across the front of their position and along the bank of the Bannockburn to break up any mounted charge against them. So they were on a slight, I believe they were on a slight, they might have been, I believe they were on a slight, like, high ground, like a slight slope. Or they could have not been. Anyhow, probably. Okay, so then they built these pits that you couldn't see while approaching, in theory. And so this is like combat engineering techniques, right? You're building, you're using the terrain features to link into your defensive position. Here, let me just read through this real quick and see if I can figure out where. Let's see. All right. Well, so they, I can't really find any data on whether they had the high ground or not. But the definition of these, or when they describe these pots, these pits in the earth, they were like deep, and supposedly they were hidden by the line of sight, and they were deep enough for like the horses to buckle. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to. It's just like barbed wire or concertina wire fence. It's not enough to. You're not going to stop a tank with. Well, I shouldn't say that. Oh God, you're not gonna. Theoretically, you're not going to stop a tank, a movement of tanks, a platoon, or a movement of tanks to get through. But you can sure as fuck slow them down. And what you want to do is you kind of want to put your barbed wire or your concertina wire fences up in one section, so you're like, it's like chess. So you're opening up a lane of advance that you actually want them to take. And this is exactly what Robert the Bruce did. He was like, here's all these fucking pits, feel free to bring your, cause it's like everyone's main tactic in these situations were charge. You just got to charge. Like there's no small unit tactics. You just got a bunch of fucking armored dudes on horses and just you charge. Like that's what happened. So, Robert the Bruce is like, yeah, go ahead and charge through this. I'm gonna, scramble your charge up. But he left a lane of advance open, but the lane of advance that was open was in boggy water. It was like in mud pits, right? So there again, he's minimizing the effectiveness of this charge. This is like in Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, seminal, life-changing comic book. It came out in like 1985, I think, or maybe 1986, and Batman has to fight the leader of the mutant gang, and he's fought him once already and got his ass whipped. So he's going to fight him again. And he says, like, my thing, like, he's 55 at the time, and he goes, my problem is I tried to fight this guy like a young man. I tried to fight him, using, like his techniques and stuff. He goes, what I need to do, I need to have thought about it. So what he does is he orchestrates, he leaves this pipe, he breaks, like he makes it seem like he's breaking this guy out of prison. He's leading him in the sewer system, and he comes out in a mud pit. And the mutant leader dude's like, are you afraid to fight me, old man? And Batman's like, he's way faster, he's way more stronger than I am, but no one is that fast when they're thigh high in mud. So this is, this is something that, bogging people down is, there. That's it. Ironically, I think Bruce Wayne is also named after Robert the Bruce. Maybe that's why I brought it up. Anyhow, the fight is epic. He winds up Brazilian jiu-jitsuing this guy and breaking his fucking joints. And he goes, he's fucking the guy up, and he's like, you don't get it, boy. He's like, this isn't a mud pit. It's an operation table, and I'm the surgeon. And he just fucking triangle snaps his arm. All right, enough about Batman. What am I even talking about? So this article doesn't mention it. At least it hasn't yet. But another combat engineer trick, another thing they did is they went and they busted up the roadway to make it more difficult for the horses and their riders. All right, so we're going to go into the battle. Robert the Bruce is a lot like, people imagine Batman is like right now, where he's like, if he had enough time to prepare, he could defeat anybody. This is something you hear about master tacticians, and in this case, it is certainly true. Robert the Bruce used every trick and every he's about to use every tactic. He's got some doozies. The Scots soldiery was aroused at around daybreak on Sunday the 23rd of June 1314. Maurice, the aged blind abbot of Incheffray, celebrated mass for the army, after which Robert the Bruce addressed his soldiers, informing them that anyone who did not have the stomach for a fight should leave. The great cry reassured him that most were ready for the battle, and the camp followers, known as the small folk, were sent off to wait in the rear of the field, probably on the hill called St. Giles Hill. The Skiltrons were formed for battle, fronting the fords over the Bannockburn that the English must cross. So just a quick talk about the small folk business. Camp followers. So just like modern day logistics, like you need, no matter where you're, like, whenever you're making large troop movements, you need support staff. So it's part of the supply train and the logistics. You need cooks, and you need beans, bullets, and band-aids. You know what I mean? It's like it's a first sergeant's business. So that's what these camp followers were. They were kind of like the civilian support staff for this army. So he actually puts them off aside a little bit. And there's actually a huge legend about these, urban myth around this battle, specifically dealing with these camp followers, which may or may not get talked about on this website, and also some alternate theories about it. But I mean, that's insensitive. I'm sorry, Dr. Towers, that's insensitive to call them small folk. Are you assuming my height? Edward's army had marched some 20 miles on Saturday, the 22nd June, 1314, arriving at Falkirk in the evening. Edward must have left it late in the evening Berwick if he was to reach Stirling by Midsummer's Day. Remember, the whole thing is on a counter. Edward's hand is being forced because the people at Stirling was like, if if Edward doesn't save us by the summer solstice, we're quitting. So he's rushing. So it was necessary to make up lost time. Sir James Keith led a mounted patrol to watch the arrival of the English army, and he found this a daunting sight as Edward's men camped over a wide area, the sun glistening on a myriad of weapons and armor. The English army was formed in 10 divisions, each led by a senior nobleman or experienced knight. On Sunday, the 23rd of June, 1314, Edward's army began its final march up to the Bannockburn. The king was met by Sir Philip Mowbray, who had ridden out of... This was the guy that was in charge of Stirling Castle. He's the one that made the agreement that if he wasn't relieved, he was going to quit. So he was able to get out of the castle to meet Edward, with a body of horsemen taking the path through the boggy ground by the fort, leading to the cars and across the Bannockburn. I think that's supposed to say through the boggy ground by the ford, leading to the cars and across the Bannockburn. De Mowbray tried to persuade Edward to abandon his advance to battle. De Mowbray seems to have had grave reservations on the outcome, not shared by the headstrong nobles and the knights that Edward led. A body of some 300 horsemen under Sir Robert Clifford and Henry de Beaumont rode back to Stirling Castle with de Mowbray to reinforce the garrison. This body took the path de Mowbray had ridden out on and passed under the noses of Randolph's children. Randolph received a stinging rebuke from the king, who remarked, "See, Randolph, there is a rose fallen from your chaplet. Thoughtless man, you have permitted the enemy to pass." Randolph rushed his foot soldiers down the path to block the route of Clifford and de Beaumont's forces. A savage fight took place, and the English horsemen, unable to penetrate the spear points of Randolph's hastily formed children. The Scots were hard pressed, and Douglas moved his men forward to give help, but saw that the English were giving way. The English squadron broke in two, with half riding for the castle and the remainder returning to the main army. In the initial attack, Sir Thomas Grey was brought from his horse and taken, while Sir William d'Eyncourt was killed. While Clifford and de Beaumont were engaged with Randolph's men, the main, English army had moved out of Torwood, and the English advance continued inexorably with the advance guard under the Earls of Hereford and Gloucester, riding to cross the Bannockburn and attack the Scots in the forest beyond. To the English, it seemed inevitable that the Scots would withdraw and avoid battle in view of the enormous disparity in numbers and arms. Wrong. It was at this point where Hereford's nephew, Sir Henry de Bohun, galloped ahead of the English array to challenge the Scots king to single combat. This is maybe one of the best stories in here. Robert the Bruce rode forward. So they make this seem like it was a duel. Other places I've read, they make it seem like an accident. This guy was probing the defenses, and he just happened to cross Robert, who was like not in his armor and just like chilling. So I don't know. Full disclosure, I I didn't see any definitive, way. I think I would choose rather to believe that Robert he just had to take a dump or something, so he kind of rode out, by himself, and this all happened while this guy was like probing the defenses. So take of it what you will. Okay, so he's going to challenge the Scots king to single combat. Robert the Bruce rode forward to meet de Bohun. The contrast in their equipment was stark. De Bohun was fully armored with a lance and shield and rode a heavy destrier horse. De Bruce rode a light palfrey and was armed with a sword and a short axe, and he was mounted to command infantry, not to take part in a heavy cavalry charge. De Bohun rode at De Bruce with his lance couched. That means it was like strapped in, like he had it strapped in. De Bruce evaded De Bohun's lance point, and with his Anglo-Norman thundered past him, struck him a deadly blow on the head with his axe, and De Bohun fell dead. Following their king's triumph, the Scots infantry rushed on the English army, struggling to clear the Bannockburn, where the ford had compelled the mass of horsemen to pack into a narrow column. Again, you always have to tie your defenses in. This was the lane they left open for them. We're ready for you on this side with all our pits and all this. Cracked up road and all this. So they're like, hey, I think we might be able to squeeze through there. Wrong. A terrible slaughter ensued. The English knights impeded by the shallow pits concealed with branches. Among the extensive English casualties, the Earl of Gloucester was wounded and unhorsed, being rescued from death or captured by his retainers. After the engagement, such of the English had come through the force recrossed the Bannockburn on the Scots infantry and returned to their positions in the forest of the New Park. The English army had been convincingly repelled, and Robert de Bruce's immediate lieutenants reproached him for the risk he had taken in giving de Bohun a single combat, and the king simply regretted breaking his axe. He's like, he fucking beats this guy's head in with an axe in single combat, and they're all like, what are you doing? You're crazy. Without you, all this falls apart. And he's like, yeah, man, but I really love this axe. At the end of the day, Robert de Bruce consulted with his commanders as to the future conduct of battle. The king proposed that the Scots army might withdraw from the field, leaving the English army to attempt to reconquest Scotland until a lack of supplies forced it to withdraw south of the border. On the other hand, the Scots could renew the battle the next day. Bruce's commanders urged a resumption of the battle. Soon afterwards, a Scottish knight, Sir Alex Seaton, arrived from an English camp, having decided to resume his feet. So he's a defector. Scottish knight defected from, he was serving on the English side. He defected back to the Scottish side and advised de Bruce that the morale was low in the English army, and Seaton said, sir, if you wish to take all of Scotland, now is the time. Edward's army is grievously discouraged. You may beat them on the morrow with little loss and great glory. And Robert the Bruce is a magnificent bastard because he stays. He stays, and he actually changes his battle tactics. He's like, okay, so they saw what we had for them today, so we're going to camp for the night. We're going to do a couple little things, and then we're going to change up our whole game plan. Changes up the whole game plan. This fucking English king has no idea what is about to happen to him if he tries this again. And he does. He does. This whole story is actually, you could boil it down to just the story between King Edward II and Robert the Bruce. And it's brilliant. It's a stark representation of the two different total competency levels, I guess. The English camp on the far side of the Bannockburn, the infantry was more than discouraged. The word was that the war was unrighteous, and it had been the cause of the day's defeat. God was against the English army. Order broke down, and the horde of foot soldiers ransacked the supply wagon and drank through the night. Heralds declared the victory was certain in the morning, but few were convinced. It was decided that the assault in the morning would be brought about by the crossing of the Bannockburn. So this is actually what I was talking about earlier, when they left the lane of attack open through the Bannockburn, which is the boggy area near the river Forth, to avoid the pits. The English knights would then deploy and charge the Scots' position at New Park. Wrong. Earlier in the morning, the English crossed the Bannockburn and formed up along the edge of the Cars of Balquidderock, ready to charge the Scots. It was not a good position. To the left of the English line lays the Bannockburn. The right was helmed by the Pell Stream, and they were too many English for the narrow area. He's squeezing them, just like we've seen in Boudica, just like, we've all seen 300. Like this, it's basically the same sort of tactic. The abbot of Inchefflery again passed among the Scots soldiery, blessing them. Again, he held mass, and the abbot had brought the relics of St. Fillan and Abbot Bernard of Arbroath to be brought in the reliquary casket of St. Columbia to encourage the simple and superstitious soldiery. Seeing and kneeling Scots, Edward commented to the Unfreville that they were craving his forgiveness for opposing him. The Unfreville answered that they were craving only divine forgiveness. So across the battlefield, the Scots are kneeling down and praying. And King Edward II's like, look, man, they want me to forgive them. Like, this is going to be easy. As part of the morning ceremony, de Bruce knighted those of his army he considered had distinguished themselves on the previous day, including Walter Stewart and James Douglas. The Scots army then began to advance, to the astonishment of the English, that foot soldiers should advance against mounted knights. Edward said to Umfreville, will these Scotsmen... will they even fight? Will these even fight? To Umfreville said, these men will gain all or die in trying. Edward said, so be it, and signaled for the trumpets to sound the charge. Remember what I said. Back in these days, it was all about charging and trying to flank. There was no small unit, tactics. First off the mark was the Earl of Gloucester. Man, I have a real problem with that word. Edward had treated his suggestion of the day to recover from the previous day's battle as cowardice, and Gloucester intended to disprove this slur. The English knights hurled themselves into the Scottish spear line with a terrible crash. The charge fell on Edward the Bruce's Shiltron. Many of the English knights were killed in the impact. Gloucester, Sir Edmund de Moliere, Sir Payne de Tiptoft. That's an awesome name, Sir Payne de Tiptoft. I'm going to steal that name. And Sir Robert de Clifford among them. Randolph and Douglas's Shiltrons came up to the left flank and attacked the unengaged English cavalry waiting to charge the support in the first line. On the extreme English right flank, the Welsh archers came into action, causing a pause in the Scots attack until they were dispersed by Keith's force of light horsemen. So this is one of the strokes of genius that the Bruce did. Well, he kept this contingent of light horsemen kind of in reserve, and when the English archers started getting into action, that's when he signaled the light horsemen to attack the archers. I mean, just like archers, they're not armored, they're light, they stay away. He used the horses. The horses close great distance. That's the whole point of a horse. So as the cavalry is attacking these spearmen, it just sounds ridiculous, or the spearmen are attacking the horsemen, these mounted knights, however you break it down, whatever. And these light horsemen are just sitting here waiting for these archers to open up. And as soon as they open up, they get rained upon, son, by these horsemen. Supporting the assault, the spearmen and the Skiltrons, the Scots archers poured volleys of arrows into the struggling English cavalry line, and it was pushed back across the dry ground and into the broken area of the Carse. The Scots spearmen pressed forward against the increasingly exhausted and hemmed in English army. The cry went up, "Oh them, they fail, they fail." The final blow was the appearance of the small folks. The Scots camp followers shouting and waving sheets, and the English army began to fall back to the Bannockburn with ever-increasing speed and confusion. This is the legend of the small folk that I was talking about. The confusion of foot soldiers and the horsemen attempted to force their way across the stream. High banks impeded the crossing, and many are said to have drowned in the confusion. Many escaped across into the area of the tidal bog land known as Les Palais, where they fell prey to exhaustion, heavy equipment, and the knives of the small folk. So I mentioned earlier that the arresting and the disbanding of the Templars. So there are a lot of stories out there saying that and I also mentioned that Robert the Bruce got excommunicated for killing John Comyn in Greyfriars. So there's this theory that because Robert the Bruce was excommunicated, when the Templars escaped persecution, the ones that did, some of them went to Scotland to hang out in the Highlands. And it's a lot like in, I don't know why I'm doing all these comic book references, but it's not like in Endgame or Infinity War, where the Black Panther, okay, well, there's aliens coming to kill Wakanda, so we got to go and we got to get Bucky. We got to go get Bucky Barnes. He might be tired of war, but war is not done with him. And it gives him a new robot arm. So there's a theory that this is what happened. And Robert the Bruce was like, yeah, bros, you can hang out in Scotland. And then when war was coming, he was like, hey, you Templar Knights, now's the time. You might be tired of war, but war is not done with you. And he gave them all robot arms. And he was like, come on. So there's theories that this small folks charge was actually a charge of Templar Knights. And then there's also a theory that the 600 horsemen that mowed through these archers were Templar Knights. And it said that when they came down in their white and red. They came down in their colors. They hid their colors and stuff, and when they came down to help the Bruce, they came down wearing their colors. And that was part of the psychological warfare. Just these 600 Templars on their horses, whether they were armored or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, these guys were like combat force multipliers, during the Crusades. He's a tank. It's basically a tank. So 600 of I agree, if they were there, they were probably the 600 dudes that ran through the archers. And they were it wasn't even necessarily that they were combat force multipliers. It was the fact that they were there and they had their colors on. Ah, man, I fucking love that. I think it's awesome to think about it. Think about these dudes hiding out from the Catholics in this, under the protection of an excommunicated king of Scotland. And he's like, yo, I'm going to need that favor now. And these Templars came down and they helped beat Edward. They helped beat vastly outnumbered, outsorted, outgunned, whatever, invasion in this battle won Scottish independence. This was one battle that won a whole campaign. I think the idea is terribly fascinating and terribly romantic. Anyhow, we've been talking about the Templars a little bit, so I thought that this would be a cool way to kind of mix this in with it, because we haven't done a straight up history one for, I don't know, a couple weeks. All right, let's talk about the aftermath of the Battle of Bannockburn. Once it was clear that the day was lost, this is a great story. The Earl of Pembroke seized King Edward's bridle and led him away from the battle, surrounded by the royal retainers and accompanied by Sir Giles of Argenteuil. Once the king was safe, de Argenteuil returned to the battle and was killed. He actually says this thing where he's like, hey man, I'm a knight. I've been through like 100 fights and I never ran from one of them. And now that you're safe, I'm going to go back. This guy probably knew he was just riding to his fucking death by a bunch of dirty Scotsmen. Edward was taken to the gates of Stirling Castle, where de Mowbray urged the king not to take refuge in the castle, as he would inevitably be taken prisoner when the castle was forced to surrender to the Scots. Edward took this advice and with his retinue skirted the battlefield and rode for Lithgow. He then rode to Dunbar and took a boat to Berwick. A group of nobles, the Earl of Hereford, a bunch of just dudes, whatever. They were taken and they were handed to the Scots by the castle constable, Sir Walter Fitzgilbert. The Earl of Pembroke led the survivors of the Welsh archers away from the battlefield, and after a torturous and hazardous march brought them back to Wales. One of these archers may have been the source of the account of the battle in the Valley Crucis Abbey Chronicle. Among the other prisoners were Sir Marmaduke de Twang and Sir Raoul de Mothmere. Sir Robert the Bruce returned the bodies of Gloucester and Sir Robert de Clifford to Berwick for burial by their families, and the Bruce conducted a vigil over the body of Gloucester, to whom he was related. So I mentioned the combat engineering way, like the importance of the combat engineer stuff to prepare for the Battle of Bannockburn. But I need to just go back a little bit and talk about the infantry tactics that also was a game changer here. So, I mentioned this on podcast before. I can't remember which one I was talking about, but I actually was talking about the Battle of Stirling Bridge. This is the one in Braveheart where they made spears. How long? Some spears are longer than others. And he's like, you've been talking to your mother. So in Braveheart, they introduce this idea of cutting these spears twice as long as men or whatever. And they use these spears to deal with charging cavalry. And that's something that was done here. So Robert the Bruce was able to take this tactic and to use it. He's realizing, in some way that, a heavy cavalry charge, which was like the tactic of the day, which we already talked about, was like, it was a psychological attack as much as it was a physical attack. And he might have learned from the Battle of Stirling Bridge that the way to deal with these things are, you have some fucking hardcore motherfuckers with these spears, these tightly packed shrilltrons, as they call them, with these spears to make a bristly mound of spears. And this is a way that you could deal with, you could deal with these horses. And he used it brilliantly. It's just like a dude, like, yo, motherfucker, you don't want to mess with me. Look at me, and you're just like, yeah, but I got a bunch of dudes with spears, It's interesting. It's the dichotomy of like the concertina wire fence and the tank, I think. It's maybe the same aspect of a different doctrine, I don't know. Anyhow, I'm John. This has been the Ambercast. Thanks again. Hey, you guys, you say it's your birthday. It's my birthday too. Thank you guys. I'm glad you're enjoying our podcast. It's ours. It's yours and mine. It's our podcast. Towers out. It is an apprentice in the order of the Abercast who now wishes to receive more light by passing to the degree of the fellow craft. He is prepared, worthy, and well qualified, and he is vouched for. Let him enter in the name of the Lord and be received in due form. Yo, bros, John here. Hey, check out this fellow craft preview. This is on Crowley's Liber 4 here. We're talking about section 2 of that book, which is all about the elemental theory of magic. I fucking love this shit. He sort of talks about all the tools and items in the magician's toolbox, and it's super interesting. It's a total of over 139 minutes of content just on this section. There are 3 episodes available for the fellow craft tier on Subscribestar. It's only a $3 tier. There's also 3 episodes about the first section of Liber 4 or Liber APA, and a ton of other exclusive episodes available now only at Subscribestar. And it's the fellow craft tier. There's only one tier. It's just one tier, $3. You get everything. Thank you so much for your support. And this is based on the pyramid of fire, which symbolizes the aspiration of the student concerning the water in the cup. It may be said that it's just as the wand should be perfectly rigid, the ideal solid, so should the water be the ideal fluid. The wand is erect and must extend into infinity, and the surface of the water is flat and must extend into the infinity. One is the line and the other is the plane. But as the wand is weak without breadth, so is the water false without depth. The understanding of the megas must include all things, and the understanding must be indefinitely profound. Understanding the structuralization of knowledge. The magic cup is the flower, and the lotus which opens to the sun and which collects the dew. It's funny. It's not funny, but it's cool. If you look at Crowley's tarot deck, the Thoth deck, he's got all this flower imagery all over the cups, the cup, the suit of cups. This lotus is in the hand of Isis, the great mother, and the symbol similar to the cup in the hand of Our Lady Babylon. There is also the lotuses of the human body according to the Hindu system of physiology. There is a lotus of 3 petals in the sacrum, in which the Kundalini lies asleep. This lotus is the receptacle of reproductive force. There is also the 6-petaled lotus opposite of the navel, which receives the forces which nourish the body. There is also a lotus in the solar plexus, which receives the nervous forces. And the 6-petaled lotus in the heart of the heart corresponds to the Tifereth and receives those vital forces which are connected with the blood. Ba-bump, ba-bump. The 16-petaled lotus opposite of the larynx receives the nourishment needed by the breath, and the 2-petaled lotus of the pineal gland receives the nourishment needed by thought. While above the junction of the cranial structure is the sublime lotus of 1,001 petals, which receives the influence from on high, in which, in the adept, the awakened Kundalini takes her pleasure with the Lord of all. All of these lotuses are figured by the magic cup. The magic cup must have no lid, yet it must be kept veiled most carefully at all times, except when invocation of the highest is being made. The cup is also hidden from the profane. The wand must be kept secret, lest the profane, fearing it, should succeed in breaking it. The cup, lest wishing to touch it. Ooh, the cup, lest wishing to touch it. He should defile it. Thus, ultimately, the wand is a binding and a limitation, so the cup is an expansion into the infinite. This is the danger of the cup and must necessarily be open to all. And yet, if anything to put into it which is out of proportion, unbalanced, or impure, it takes hurt, since the best is the water, but a reflection how tremendously important it becomes. And it should be still. If the cup is shaken, the light will be broken up. Therefore, the cup is placed upon the altar, which is foursquare, will multiplied by will, the confirmation of the will in the magical oath. Its fixation is the law.
Learn more at theabracast.com. Get graphic elements, notes, worksheets, and text versions of selected episodes, as well as access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing into the mailing list. Get all that, plus exclusive episodes, by supporting the show and becoming a subscriber at subscribestar.com.